the last couple of sections join together the idea of, civic activities, Tocqueville as a sort of main theory here. That is that the civic organizations can make a distinctive difference, improving democracy, participation, building legitimacy. The counter was, for Tocqueville, the strong state, the revolutionary chopping off the heads with the guillotines of the elite, and the loss, not just loss, that is, those factors built a sense of lack of legitimacy, revolution, and thus to see democracy as an alternative for France and for the Europeans, which didn't have any sense of democracy, especially on the continent. So this was new, revolutionary, and how might it work? And this is being more explicitly debated, I would say, in the last 10 years or so, 20, 30 years, we've seen a decline in legitimacy. We've seen less participation in the traditional organizations, the Lions Club, the Boy Scouts. Those kinds of things are going down in membership. I taught a class with first-year college students in the Corps when the Bowling Alone journal article came out before the book, and we discussed it. And what was the first reaction of most of the first-year college students right here? What's your reaction to Bowling Alone? Most of them said it's wrong. Why did they say it's wrong?
Well, they probably view
Just a little louder.
They probably view a lot of the social media and internet and technology that Bowling Alone says is like bad for community as actually bringing people together. So it's like the first.
That's exactly what they said. That is the immediate reaction. Social media discussions online are replacing lots of the traditional in-person organizations. Yes, and there's more and more data which shows this, and it shows it internationally, as we have, at the beginning it was 5-10% of the population had smartphones. Now it's something like 80% in China, so-called poor country, or no longer a poor country. 40 years ago, it sounded like a little more poor, but that is low-income black neighborhoods in Chicago are overwhelmed with smartphone kinds of stuff. Okay. Does this bring the same kind of activity? That's a trickier one. Imagine, for instance, talked about a friendly alternative to the normal, quote, American democracy image, but the one which is challenged, that critics have challenged Trump's January that he didn't want to give up his presidency. And then there are individuals, but there were hundreds of people there, maybe thousands of people there. Look at the media and the names of those organizations compared to the Lions Club and the Boy Scouts. Anybody give a hint on what you read about any of these organizations, the names and the people, and who did get jail sentences and then were let out by Trump just now after election? Okay, even if we don't remember the exact names, they were much more radical, revolutionary, anti-establishment, throw the bums out, and potentially, I won't try to label, but that is, the French that is, if you look at names of civic I shouldn't say civic, names of organizations, they are wild, battling in the French tradition more than the centrist American Tocquevillian tradition. How might this happen? That is, how might, first, it's not a question of definition or name. What might the dynamic of who joins these organizations be different than what Tocqueville talked about and what Putnam is talking about? That is, okay, I don't want to answer it. Just think about it for a minute. Think about size. Think about the numbers of people, say on this campus, who were protesting and who were demonstrating in favor of Trump staying on when his term was ended after 4 years. Think there were large numbers? Probably not very many on this campus. And if you were, there may be 3 people on this campus who did feel that way. Would they have a would they have an organization funded by the university and having meetings in Cobb Hall like this where they could talk about no. How might there potentially link with political activities? There may be 2 people at the University of Michigan. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say they'd find communities online, and
Yes.
that's how they'd connect with other
Yes.
universities.
That's the simple, obvious answer, and that the existence of the smartphone, joined with the internet, joined with the social media, and then entrepreneurs who create these kinds of organizations, which would not have been feasible, is possible because of these online activities, and these in turn may heighten the tendency to go to extremes on whatever issue. Yeah.
You could argue that the algorithms on the social media apps that we use.
Sorry, I missed your first word. The what?
Algorithms.
The algorithm. Okay.
Are playing a more active role now in deciding what content we're seeing, and so in developing those, anyone's perspectives on any particular issue could be informed by what these algorithms are deciding to show you based on what you engage with more, and so it becomes like a feedback loop. And so I think in addition to providing space for people to find other like-minded people, that these apps are now creating that like-mindedness in a way, or creating the perspectives that people are finding in common.
And those small numbers of people in within one geographic area like the USC in Hyde Park would be transformed into maybe 2,000 nationally. But that's enough to then have people who say, let's go to Washington, let's demonstrate, let's be ready if we're called upon. And that these are the kinds of things which were featured in the public hearings, the legal proceedings, and the sending to jail of a handful of the leaders who were, they weren't saying turn out and vote, they're saying we're going to let them have it, and that is, they're talking violence, etc. And so this kind of potential transformation of the culture is not necessarily following the Tocquevillian lines, in the sense that the types of organizations can be shifting. Let me back up just a little bit to the later theories, say after Tocqueville. The core idea was then heightened here at the University of Chicago. Bentley was a political scientist who talked about groups and group theory. This was the mainstream political science theory from the 1920s to say, let's went until the 1970s. And one of the more specific works were by David Truman. It was called The Governmental Process, and then Dahl's book, Who Governs? Truman was a little more explicit. He was more explicit than Dahl or the others in saying, if you have interests that a certain number of people who share, you'll automatically, almost quasi-automatically, will get an organization. Implying that the value added by the organization may be small. And that may be generally true, and if you look at the Boy Scouts, the civic, the things which are representing the wide numbers, and there are many participants, and we don't. And in those days, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, we didn't have the kind of data to test these kinds of things. As we've now got more and more data about who's joining, what are the names of these extreme organizations, how many are there, and then what did they say in their email discussions among each other. This is the kind of stuff that goes to court now. These things matter, and they make more visible and public the challenges to the more centrist interpretation. Let's flash forward and we're going back and forth between some examples and some middle and more abstract theories. So the bigger theory is group theory, challenging what was the continental European theory as an alternative, which dominated Italy, Spain, France, much of these late 19th, early 20th century, by many of the social scientists and many journalists. Basically, it was Marxism, or at least either a strong Leninist Marxism, and Lenin himself said, the class is not alone. Having class conflict of the proletariat is not alone to bring the revolution. We need a vanguard party. So Lenin added that and emphasized that more over Marx, in the sense that Lenin was working most of the German leading theorists said, you can't have a revolution in Russia. You don't have a proletariat that's ready. You're a traditional peasant society. You got to wait. So that was the so-called the Bolshevik answer versus the Menshevik versus the Bolshevik. So the Menshevik answer was wait, and following the German theorists, Lenin said now, but now means we need a vanguard party to show the way. And so in that sense, there's a value added by the organization, which is different from the Tocqueville, or let's say the idea that interest will automatically create an organization. It doesn't necessarily add very much. Take some other, so the groups that may have supported Trump in demonstrations. How about let's say in other kinds of views, if we have politically distinctive, how about Black Lives Matter? Anybody have any sense of where and how that may have made a difference? Two, 3 years, clearly there was, the media were featuring Black Lives Matter statements, speeches, military, I would say military, black power and strong rhetoric. If we think of other options and have these competing options, parties with Lenin or others, or more generally the European continental view of the parties is they're strong. And I talked about even in England, the party whip would not slate me for office if I don't follow the party as defined by the local party whip. Englewood neighborhood, just south and west of Chicago, is one of the poorest, one of the most high crime, dangerous neighborhoods within Chicago. When Black Lives Matter said we want to come and have a rally and talk about these issues in Englewood, what happened? The Englewood, this is interesting here, now we got a conflict in a sense between a natural experiment. The Englewood political leaders, the aldermen and I think it was the aldermen and maybe a civic organization jointly said, if they're Black Lives Matter speakers who are residents of Englewood, they can speak. But if they come from outside our neighborhood, they can't. So Black Lives Matter didn't have anybody from Englewood. So they canceled it. That's a value added, a good, powerful conflict between the not just one illegitimate, one alderman saying this. That is, how was the mayor Rahm Emanuel challenged in his second election as mayor? His challenging opponent was really strongly supported by the teachers union, and now we have the mayor is basically an activist organizer from the teachers union. So so let me back up a little bit to say both the current mayor and the earlier candidate against Rahm Emanuel had all the endorsement of the major organizations. He had tons of money, and he did not have a majority. They had to have a second election, and then he managed to squeak by. But the point was that for the first major time historically in the minds of most people observing these things, the teachers union and the neighborhood associations joined together, and they've traditionally been separate structures which had different political bases. With Rahm Emanuel closing down a larger number of neighborhood schools and saying these are these are lousy schools, we're going to shut them off and start over from scratch, get a new superintendent, a new principal, a new principal for the school, new set of teachers, etc., and try to do a better job. Okay, that led to so many parents and kids who wanted to not leave their neighborhood schools that they were furious with the mayor. There were lots of public debates, and people then said, I'll run for mayor against this because we don't want this to happen. Okay, so my point is, what might have been part of that grounds for that mobilization against the mayor, and what might have been the neighborhood grounds? Ethnicity. That the especially African American neighborhoods, to some degree Hispanic and mostly Mexican neighborhoods, they have a much stronger sense of ethnic and neighborhood identity. I live in Bronzeville. This is very clear. The content of what is Black Power, or what should Black Power be, is fought over within Bronzeville, but not publicly, generally. Okay. Obama himself, Michelle Obama is a black traditional activist. Her husband, who was elected president, was not. He's much more, at least his general statements were much more coalitional. We want to help the disadvantaged, people have difficulties, but he was not a clear, strong Black Power, which was the BA thesis title of Michelle Obama's Princeton BA thesis. And when he was running for president, the BA thesis disappeared from the Princeton library. Nobody could find out what was said, and she stopped talking about politics for 4 years. There was a video when he was running. There was a video made about her and her neighborhood of South Shore, just south of here, and there was nothing said in the video of Black Power. It was about playing basketball. It was being neighborly with your friends, and that was her style in the video. Okay. So symbolic presentations, we talked about the black gangs being edited and transformed substantially. This has become far more subtle and sensitive than the counting of the people who were there in the room, or the numbers as they were more often used in the past. Okay, so the role of ethnicity and the linkages of ethnicity with social media and the like are new and important, but they're good ways to try to sharpen these propositions that I'm giving. That is, we have some general propositions in the syllabus, but if we try to look for some more specific propositions and then some examples of how these work. It's interesting as I'm looking for extreme cases, extreme examples to try to say it can work this way. And Chicago and its neighborliness is a very powerful example. Putnam did surveys after doing his book Bowling Alone. He did some surveys on how much do people participate in civic groups within different areas. There were metro areas that he surveyed, and he covered the U.S. The interesting thing was the lowest metro area in the U.S. was Los Angeles. Roughly 20% either say that they participate in civic organizations, and I can also add, they also had much less trust than most other Americans. North Dakota, South Dakota had about 80%, 70 or 80% say that they participate and they support the national government and the federal government officials much more positively than, and the other extreme being LA. So we have these differences within the U.S., and the same thing we can find, for instance, in southern Italy versus Denmark and Norway, Finland. They have very high trust. 80, people. They're small towns. They have one or two big cities, but they're mostly small town countries, and they are at a big variable. Homogeneity. Traditionally, they had no ethnic groups. That is, no separate ethnic groups. They were all Norsemen. Okay. people who discovered America, you know, years long before Christopher Columbus. Okay, this has changed in the last 20, 30 years, and the shock which is brought to especially the Danes, the Danish legal system has been so shocked by the arrival of especially Arabs, and so Muslims who have traditionally had a young brother under 16 or 15, 16, or maybe under 18, depending on the issue, has murdered the sister who has not chosen a husband following her father or grandfather's recommendation. Okay, so individualism versus family, patriarchal, traditional dominance. And so this has been recognized all around the world, has been done in Germany and so forth, but the Danes have said 12 people are going to jail, and I mean, given like, you know, long-term, maybe life sentences in jail because of organizing a murder of a daughter, of their own daughter. Okay, so this is simply an illustration of the degree to which homogeneity and the values of being shared traditionally in the Scandinavian countries. They also still have more class politics. You have socialist, basically socialist type social democratic parties are their names. However, what are their programs? Is it Marx? Is it Lenin? No. There's a lot of environmentalism, feminism, gays and individual lifestyle, which is closer to what the Euro-communist people had followed for 20 years or so, while the French did not. So my point is, look for extreme cases and conflicts within them, as illustrated by Denmark or North Dakota, with a homogeneous kind of lifestyle. You find some that the dynamics, that other factors are associated with each other, illustrate how a proposition as we have it here can not just be abstractly hypothetical. These exist. There are cases we can find of these in ways that or just one more example from Denmark. The rise of populism. Okay, populism has been used in many different ways, but in some ways, some more than many have interpreted that the first populist post-World War II European were the Danish party called I think it was called the Populist Party, or something or other, or maybe the People's Party. But they had a program which was fire all social workers, fire the military, replace the military with an answering machine, has install a direct line to Moscow with an answering machine which says, "We surrender, we surrender, we surrender." And they came from no background to having, I think, either almost or a slight majority in the National Assembly of the Danish national government. Is that human rights? What kind of rights? Okay, it illustrates types of human rights get redefined in different cultures and socio-political contexts. Okay. Though that was early, this was well before Macron and Berlusconi and others who really were participating and destroying the traditional stronger parties, which were replacing them with So Berlusconi was, as you know, was a major media owner and political activist, and was prime minister for a number of years. But in those years when he and the media and his new coalitions were elected, there were the traditional parties, which had been Christian Democrat, Socialist, and Communist. They all got replaced by 30 individual political parties and caucuses, and the regionalism. A group of people in the northern part of Italy were saying, you know, we want to have more regionalism, and we don't like those people coming from Sicily, but even more, we don't like those people coming from North Africa or Black Africa. There's a lot of very open racism in Italy, and in parts of Germany. I mean, I bike around when I've been at meetings, and I bike all around in Italy and Germany, and you see on the bike path, you say, you know, foreigners, get out of here. You're not wanted here. That kind of populist in the sense of slogans on bike paths. These are not advertisements by the big corporations or the big parties. Okay, and of course we have had with an election yesterday this emergence more in Germany was a major exception. The Germans still were so concerned about not generating bad linkages. It could be seen as any way linked with Hitler. So the Germans were so sensitive to that has now changed in the sense that they're willing to talk about nationalism, but the other parties, they said this is it's now the second party, but the other parties have said we're not going to include that, you know, that nationalist party, and so the Christian Democrats will probably come back to office in Germany. But the point is, in France, in England, in Germany, the traditional linkages have gotten weaker. That is, we've got more divisions. They're more strong divisions in ways that can link with patterns from the past. Okay. The media can play the media and the different numbers of people who can play a distinctive role in transforming the dynamics of global and local politics. Key themes of the course. Okay. We've seen this with okay, just to mention the readings. I mentioned Dahl a little bit. I'm going this first because Dahl has Dahl, it's a great book. I would say it's a weak book on ethnicity. What does he say on ethnicity, which anybody remembers or know anything about? What does he say about the history of New Haven and what was the ethnic transformation in local politics? Okay. From the late 18th century up to about 1860, 1870, 1880, New Haven politics, in this sense, it represented a similar style of politics in Boston, New York, Providence, that is the largest cities in the Northeast, had basically a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant majoritarian style. It's taken for granted. This deeply was changed after about 1870 with the arrival of, most visibly, and we talked about Boston a week or two ago, the Italians and the Irish. And then it was basically those two groups, and they tended to dominate in New Haven and Providence as well. New York got a little more differentiated, more larger, more subtle combinations, and Chicago much further still. Chicago didn't have such a single group, although its largest ethnic group was Poles, Polish and Polish, but that is what was shared was that they were white Catholics, and they fought against and transformed the political leadership, which then crystallized after the 1930s, when the Democratic Party became a real machine and was the most important local political machine in the U.S. As we've discussed. Okay, what did Dahl? So Dahl's point was to say how does the politics work about around these concerns in New Haven at the end of the 19th century, and he talked about he doesn't mention or barely mention Irish or Italian. He talks about ex-plebes, that is, people who were, it's a neo-class conflict kind of label, ex-plebe, former plebeians. He doesn't say proletarians. It's that is, but basically basically it was a white Catholic domination in the Democratic Party of New Haven through the end of the 19th through the mid 20th century. After World War II, the one, so it's in terms of the ethnic theme. So why does Dahl say this? Dahl says, he reflects not just him and not just New Haven. Many Americans in those years would say ethnic groups are welcome. The Statue of Liberty is there. We have people who come from Russia, from Ireland. We welcome them to come to America, and we expect them to become American. And so that became increasingly challenged by the civil rights movement after the 1970s, and we had the then white ethnic groups followed the black model of having an active Polish, German, not so much German in the U.S., but it exists. French, Quebecois, Italians. The measures we have with things like food and restaurants. The Italians are the strongest neighborhood supporters of their Italian food, much more than any, but it's especially in the Northeast. Okay, what changed was Mayor Lee. Mayor Lee in the New Haven book was more close to what we call in the course and in the book the new political culture. That is, he broke with the traditional left and right, and he was a Democrat, but not a kind of Chicago strong machine. On the contrary, he was much more concerned with, at least in the book, with the issues and with following a consensual Adlai, closer to Adlai Stevenson than to Richard Daley. Okay. Called liberalism in those years, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Neoliberalism has then entered more to refer to a sort of strong not Marxist, economic deterministic kind of label, implying that if we really follow market and economic interests, that defines the political processes. So it's a narrow definition of politics that could come from a strong market, and the term neoliberal has usually been used by its critics in places like Latin America, where they're fighting against, and in Chicago, fighting against traditional neighborhoods, traditional ethnic and regional associations which have personal relationships and fight against with this kind of market. So these are competing. I'm showing you competing models from Latin America, from Lenin and others, These are competing more general processes which we distill into the propositions in the syllabus. Strong parties is an abstract, but if we look at the specifics with Chicago and the like, we can see how these dynamics play out. Okay, so that's in a sense that's probably the mainstream kind of interpretation which Dahl presents here, and also written enough. I think it was published in 1961, so it was before things got more strongly conflictual. We have intervening. Let me chronologically. I'll flash forward to the Browning, Marshall, and Tabb book, Racial Politics in American Cities. I mean, that's a pretty big title. This is the second edition. The first edition was 10 cities in the Bay Area only, and of those 10, that is, when California was created, it had more of this liberal tradition of consensus. We're crossing the whole U.S. We get more consensual. We don't have as much hierarchy as they did in Boston, and much less than in London or Paris or Moscow. And so we get to California. The state of California had in its constitution no party labels, nonpartisan local elections, and that in turn was linked with maybe not in the Constitution, but strong domination of local government by city managers. Held up a slogan: "There's neither a Democratic or Republican way to fix a road." Engineers, city government is engineering, and city managers would be the people to do it. Staff. Okay, that dominated in California politics until the 60s, and we saw this at Berkeley becoming more politicized, and then it's not only so the cities in the Bay Area, we had things like Berkeley. Berkeley is the most extreme, but you had 7 of the 10 basically threw out the city managers, replaced them with mayors, and replaced them with more active election. They elected new groups that were much more following the African American and Hispanic populations, and feminists. And these then represented these new kinds of more specific issues, and they had they had open conflict, but these differed substantially from town to town. So I think there were 3 of the 10 outside San Francisco did not change. They continued the city manager. They continued a more would-be consensual engineering style. And so they did it. So then 10 years later, 5-10 years later, things kept changing. It became more militant, more ethnically, racially polarized. So they did the second edition, especially focused on LA. So LA really was highly politicized, highly conflictual. Massive numbers of white Anglo-Saxon Protestants moved out. They went to North Dakota, they went to other places. The percentage of Mexicans dramatically increased, and they had have had mayors much more oriented toward I'm going to say specifically Mexican American population, but the bigger issue was conflict. There were two counties nearby in the so-called just north of the city of LA, and the area of Hollywood. They had a referendum, and they almost both seceded from the county and wanted to have a separate government. That in turn frightened the mayor and the city council of LA and said, we need to have more democracy. I mean, they answered, We know about Tocqueville. If we need more, if we want legitimacy, we need more organizations. Same kind of Putnam kind of analysis. And they created the option that you could have a local city hall in your neighborhood, and about 80 or 90 of these were created in a couple of years. And in many areas, the west side around UCLA, Santa Monica, and so forth, those areas had these working more or less the way they did in New England and the way is described by Putnam and so forth. In the lower status areas, I mean, I went to and I taught at UCLA because I wanted to see this in fact, and I trained for this marathon in different areas, every other night all over LA. Went to all kinds of meetings. The low income African American and Mexican neighborhoods to the south of LA had minimal democratic legitimacy kind of concerns. So the University of Southern California got a big grant to study and to try to improve what can be done to build civic, or that is, what can we have these little organizations, how can we help LA become more successfully legitimate, and what can the role be of these little neighborhood organizations? And I went to the meeting. You had presidents of those little organizations who would say, I have a dozen people who work with me, they're my family, and they work with the city government, and we have low turnout, yes, we recognize that, but it works basically implicitly, but saying it works fine in Mexico, it works fine with having a strong party, and we don't need any more than 5% of the voter turnout. And they even say, I want more power. I want to have a bigger amount of power, because we don't want the city council to tell us how much we can spend. We want to have more control over our own local neighborhood budgets. So that that is dramatic differences fought over visibly in the terms that you could, I mean, I'm quoting you virtually metaphorically, let me say, I'm roughly quoting the words of the president of one of those organizations, and several others who were in the meeting. They came to the meeting and would say this in an open manner. Okay, this is the theme. The underlying racial ethnic conflict is documented in more ethnographic detail in the chapter by Browning, Marshall, and Tabb, but it fits directly with Putnam's analysis here. But I point out as well, Putnam changed his theory from book to book and topic to topic. So Bowling Alone, as I said, is a simplistic book. His later book on religion is much more subtle and creative. And then he did this paper that is basically around trust and participation locally. He uses the LA results and say, he says nothing about the organizations in the way which is stressed in the Bowling Alone book. That is, that the key variable as a driver for Putnam was basically ethnic closed neighborhoods, or ethnically closed organizations who, in a way of thinking, that they wouldn't collaborate. We think of, and we talk of, as Chicago, of having closed and traditional ethnic groups. I've met a number of Chicago leaders and civic persons and others who've done business or moved to and lived in LA for 10 years and then come back to Chicago and who know both of the cities and say there's much more conflict on the boards, whereas the Mexicans and the blacks each sit in separate little groupings. They don't talk to to the whites or to the Jewish subgroups, and each of whom are having their own little subgroups. Whereas in Chicago, the boards do not, and there are people who are active. That is, these civic groups, with many of whom have boards like this, and they talk about these kinds of things. So there's a even though this is a strong. Hopefully, close the window halfway, please. Chicago, I mean, even Chicago compared to LA, and the same thing is written about in the books on LA politics with its racial and ethnic battles. And I think the chapter by the LA expert is Raphael Sonnenschein. He's the author of that chapter, post-incorporation politics in Los Angeles. I mean, he's written a whole book on this. He studied this his whole career, so he really plays up much more strong, deep, conflictual, ethnic politics. Okay. We had a good discussion in some of the last sessions. Let me potentially stop here. Actually, Joseph Yee I haven't talked about today. I did last time. We can elaborate a little more, and it's a wonderful book. And I'll just remind you, the 4 organizations, value added, he suggests, for young African American men, high school kids that age, don't know their fathers, fight with their mothers, don't go to church as the mother and daughter would do, and they may join gangs, or they're just alone, angry. So Joseph Yee, a student at Berkeley, after the referendum, the number of blacks dropped by half, the number of Asians doubled immediately in that first year. Then affirmative action was abolished by the citizens of California in a referendum. And so Joseph Yee was feeling so guilty about this that he tried to say, what can African Americans and others around them do to try to help people? And so he looked at Tuckville, and his answer was, what are they joining? What kinds of groups are they participating in? And he has 4, and those are the ethnographic chapters of the book. Martial arts, evangelical religions, like the Mormons and others, Soko Gakkai, a Japanese-funded Buddhist organization, and is it Confucian or Buddhist? I may be careful here. It's Japanese-funded Asian religion, non-Christian. And 4th was Amway, a direct sales kind of personal relation. That is, what did all 4 of these share? A sense of hierarchy. Having a master in the martial arts class tell the kids, you do that right. And they have their 10 commandments on the wall from Asia. They're not the 10 commandments of Christianity, but they're very similar. And did you do your homework, you 12-year-old kid? I was too busy. 20 push-ups. I mean, that kind of immediate. The master in a classroom where the mother, black mother, and her son are together, no father in their family, but the master plays that authoritarian role. And each of these 4 organizations have something like this, and they have an Asian, and so Joseph Yee's a Korean American. He's proud of that Asian hierarchy as having some positive, different ways of having a dynamic, and you could test this with your A. So let me push ahead. I'll just add a sentence or 2. We can look at these components as I'm doing here in my examples. We can do this more with the kinds of data we're getting with AI. We've got AI dynamics We've got new social movements breaking up into the online variations of these. We've got new data about the past where we can look at the texts which define the programs of these organizations over time. And we can look at the ways in which these are, that we have. So in Englewood, what is there as well which make Englewood different from Bronzeville, that makes South Shore a little bit different, and then different blocks within South Shore, such as having a Theaster Gates living there, having a black cinema there, having a black library, having him put on, but living there himself as an artist and creating a sense of civility and egalitarian participation that anybody can come to who wants to. You don't have to be black to go to the black movie or to have a discussion of that. But the point is, he's in that little area of a few blocks away. So people kept asking for me, how can we leverage this up? How can we make this more general? And so that's what that was in our reading, which we saw before. But I'm simply making the general point that as we have not just ethnic traditional groups, we have newly created groups, which can be environmentalists, reformers, that is the term Reform Democrat, for instance, to talk of say Santa Monica or Brooklyn being that is having a more activist, strong leftist ideology. Leftist is the term they will often use. I won't try to flash forward there too much, so much as to simply say the new kinds of organizations are permitting and facilitating these that heighten the complexities and the subtleties of these, as we saw in our overview. Is that one way I like to summarize it was to say that if we have a matrix, we can have historical things which go back to the feudal era generating slavery, but if we then rotate that left set of labels to the top and we say, where are these present right now in Chicago, in the US, in France, in Finland, and where and how do these such as the Danish sending to prison those who are not following Danish civility in ways that are leading to dramatic political conflicts in ways that were not present 20 years ago. Okay, so so the national political systems of, as I'm mentioning, the European countries right now, not to mention Russia with Ukraine, illustrate similar kinds of domestic. I mean, this is a deep domestic politics fear that Putin has, which is there are a lot of young Russians, many emigrated, but they're still there. Okay. All right, let me stop. Let's have a little discussion. Any things about how could AI be used to analyze these themes? Either a paper you've seen from someone present, or anything you've thought about or done yourself.
I guess in this case, I really have no ideas.
Well, I mean, you've worked on parks.
Yeah.
What kind of issue, what kind of political issue might park participation connect with more generally? Or I'll give you one hint. In another reading, it's not listed on the syllabus right here, but it's on the supplementary readings, and it's on Canvas. And there's a paper, and I contrasted there the racially black-oriented civic organizations And another set, and this was in these are within the same city, but especially in different cities altogether, say Gary versus North Dakota, and where we can have the Sierra Club, that is the strongest international organization of environmentalism. They want people to go to parks, to support them. That is, this is a political dynamic, creating those parks, giving them more money, having more programs. There's signs now as you drive down Lakeshore Drive. It says, if you want a good job now, we're hiring 3,500 people to work for the parks employees, parks district workers, summer job, 3,500 jobs. Apply now. This is big. That is, this was not there 30 years ago. The parks 30 years ago in Chicago were dangerous. Nobody went there. People got shot and so forth. Now they have much more active, successful park programs: swimming, biking, running, etc. And the lakefront is used as the driving amenity. Many I have argued, and some are following, that this amenity is driving the transformation and the success of downtown Chicago. Parks. Okay, we can measure with the data you have on the numbers and the size of parks relative to the rest of the city or relative to an immediate area. You've got those data. Where and why, that is, the kinds of things we have in the Scenescapes book as well. We have data on thousands of these, some people call them industrial categories, but we can have churches, we can have bicycle clubs, and they're there by name. These kinds of things can connect to, and we can then, that is, not just have one single isolated variable like parks, but we can kind of think of if we were to take environmentalism more generally. Environmentalism has a number of potential. That is, in England, they'll have traditional fox hunting. Fox hunting is an old aristocratic gentry activity, whereas the young radicals, some British and American radicals, environmentalists will say, we want to put nails in the trees so that if chainsaw people try to chop down the trees, they'll destroy their chain. So those nails will be those nailed, so quasi-physical attacks on. That is, these are types, they're very different types of environmentalism. We can measure these. How many, and so there's one survey, but that is a survey in the past. How much do you support each of these? The British Social Survey, they added 7 different types of environmentalism. And then Margaret Thatcher picked this up, and she found that blue-collar women in England were strongly anti-nuclear, and so she embraced that issue. She talked about it, and she got a certain number of blue-collar women voting for her. So I'm simply saying, these we can capture analyzing the social media AI techniques and looking more specifically at the degree to which we have not just the environmentalists or the left, is to break these up into specifics, and what I'm pointing to are the increase in these numbers of people who can be an extreme fringe, fighting for Trump continuing as president over his term, but the more general point is the fragmentation of the whole political system globally, and it's heightened by cell phones, the internet, social media, and you got data on this. That is, you've also got other places in North Dakota. 70%, 80% of the people say national government is legitimate. And it works right here in North Dakota, in our town. Go to LA? No. You know, the TV coverage in LA covers police chases, people 100 miles an hour with, you know, the police are trying to catch up with a car. This happens all the time. And people shoot at each other on the freeways. It doesn't build Tuckvillian trust. But we can measure these, and we've got propositions. Someone give us a little more of a commentary or question. I don't at all mean to silence you, but to try to just give you some interesting dramatic examples of the abstract propositions which are also there. Where are you from? What's your town?
I'm from Chicago.
Okay. Tell us about something. Are you active in any organization you want to talk about?
In the city itself.
Or not? Where that is, if you chose to something be active which is not in the city, that's interesting.
I'm at beyond Chicago. I'm not engaged in civic organizations. I wasn't growing up. My family's not religious, so never went to church or anything like that. Yeah.
How about the Democratic Party? Your father's not a fireman or a policeman.
What do you mean by Democratic Party? Like going to organizing meetings or like?
Or saying that the Chicago Democratic Party is a good organization and I will vote for it and support it, something like that. I mean, did you hear that in your family? That is, I once had a grandfather, a father, and a son. The son was in the class, and they were all Chicago firemen.
Oh,
And they all said firemen in Chicago, but they still had very different views of what was going on in Chicago. So I'm just trying to build on some examples. I don't mean to embarrass you. I'm simply try to use you as an informant who are in this city. And if you're able to say, we didn't talk about politics, we didn't have any. Well, that's.
Yeah, I don't think we discussed local politics that much. We more focused on like national politics as a family.
Okay. But family discussion, but no organization that you or your parents went to, like a League of Women Voters or Boy Scouts or a Little League baseball. These are big things in some Chicago neighborhoods.
Sure, I mean like a sports organization maybe is one that I wasn't thinking of. Was something that my siblings and I would engage with, but in terms of like a more politically focused organization my parents were part of, for example, like my mom was part of Step Up Women's Network, which is like something that's meant to empower disadvantaged youth, particularly women, in entering like the corporate world.
Okay. That's it's good that others can hear you say that, surrounded by the Democratic Party and the firemen. That is the normal, quote, political leaders of Chicago didn't reach your family.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
but that's true of most of the world. That is the top leaders that define a political leadership style. Philip Converse says 91% don't get involved. 91% are closer to your family.
Yes.
Okay. That is, your mother had one organization she was active,
Mm-hmm.
and she was interested in those issues, and that's the converse kind of interpretation of look for and remember those. Don't let yourself be overly influenced by Black Lives Matter, which couldn't even talk in the neighborhood, which should be its strongest, being supporting neighborhood of its issues. Okay. And I say that as I live in Bronzeville, and I'm advising the board. We had a board of advising the aldermen, and they never mentioned Black Lives Matter or most of those issues. And the alderman did not, and she ran for mayor herself. Okay. Okay, well, we are at the end of the hour. Thank you, folks. We will have a session, today's,
Wednesday.